Some cheap watches look too simple to be taken seriously, but that is exactly where the mistake begins.
Because while everybody is chasing a logo, some of the most ignored brands in the watch market are quietly doing something else. They are doing the thing luxury marketing keeps pretending to do. They are selling you an actual watch. Not a fantasy, not a lifestyle package, not a recycled heritage story printed on a dial, but a watch. A man can walk into a room wearing an $80 or $150 watch and stand next to someone wearing a $1,000 fashion piece. And from across the table, people assume the expensive one is better, but then you look closer.
The cheaper watch has a mineral crystal that can take daily abuse, or even sapphire in some cases.
The movement is easier to service, easier to replace, and more reliable than anyone wants to admit. The case finishing is cleaner than expected, the strap can be swapped in 5 minutes, and the design works everywhere. It works with jeans, chinos, a navy blazer, or a plain white t-shirt, while the expensive one sells the name on the dial.
That is the question behind this entire video. Is your money going into the watch or into the story the brand tells? Today, we are looking at 5 affordable watch brands that are still underrated, not because every model they make is perfect,
not because cheap automatically means smart, because it does not, and there is cheap junk everywhere in this market. But there is also cheap that is honest, and there is cheap that is shockingly good.
We are judging these watches by 4 things: real-world price, movement, construction quality, and the reason people ignore them.
Because the biggest mistake in watches is not buying affordable, but paying luxury money for a mediocre object because the dial makes you feel safer. Number 1. Casio, the brand everybody knows, which is exactly why people stop seeing it.
A Casio on the wrist can feel almost invisible, it does not ask for attention, and it does not pretend to come from a Swiss mountain village. It does not give you a lecture about legacy, expedition, racing, aviation, diving, or some invented masculine mythology. It just works, and for a lot of watch buyers, that makes it feel too ordinary. You see a Casio in a department store, on Amazon, in a mall kiosk, or on the wrist of someone who does not care about watches. And your brain files it under basic, disposable, starter watch, something you buy before you know better, but that is the trap.
Because in pure cost per wear, Casio is one of the most dangerous brands in the entire watch industry.
A basic Casio can cost less than dinner for 2, and an entry-level digital model can run for years on 1 battery. An analog quartz model can survive sweat, knocks, rain, travel, and the kind of careless daily use that would make some dress watches beg for mercy. And when you start looking at lines like the Duro, the Addiesdive, the World Time models, and the classic square digitals, the value becomes uncomfortable.
It becomes uncomfortable for brands charging 5 or 10 times more because the consumer thinks he is buying cheap plastic or a simple quartz watch.
What he is actually buying is reliability stripped of ego, because Casio understands the real job of a watch.
It has to tell time, stay on the wrist, survive your actual life, be easy to replace, easy to maintain, and cheap enough that you are not scared to wear it.
That last part matters more than watch collectors admit, because a watch you are afraid to scratch is not a daily watch, it is wrist furniture.
Casio gives you the opposite. You put it on and forget it is there, wearing it to the gym, through airports, in the rain. You wear it on a weekend trip, under a hoodie, with a work jacket, with a casual summer fit, without needing to perform around it.
And this is where the comparison gets ugly, because a lot of expensive fashion watches use basic quartz movements too.
Nothing wrong with quartz. Quartz can be excellent, but the problem is not the movement. The problem is the price around the movement.
When a $70 Casio uses quartz, it feels honest. But when a $400 fashion watch uses a basic quartz movement inside you are no longer paying for timekeeping, you are paying for the permission to feel upgraded. But Casio does not give you that illusion. It gives you a tool, and that is why people ignore it. It is too available, too familiar, too inexpensive. It does not create distance between you and the average buyer,
and it does not make you feel like you discovered a secret club. But sometimes the most honest product is the one sitting in plain sight, and a Casio is not trying to impress a watch snob from across the room. It is trying to be there in 10 years, still working, after the watch snob has already sold 3 entry luxury pieces at a loss.
That is the power of Casio. It is not prestigious, it is useful, and useful ages better than hype.
Number 2, Citizen, which wins when the conversation turns technical, quietly embarrassing a lot of more expensive watches because it does not need to scream. It has engineering, it has scale, it has real movement technology, and it has one of the most practical systems in affordable watchmaking, EcoDrive. The average buyer looks at Citizen and sees a safe watch, maybe too safe, a watch your father might wear, a watch in a jewelry counter.
A watch that feels responsible instead of exciting, and because the designs are often clean and wearable, people mistake that restraint for boredom.
But under that boring reputation is one of the most useful technologies you can put on a wrist. Citizen EcoDrive watches are powered by light, not just direct sunlight, but everyday light, office light, window light, charging as you live with it.
That solves one of the biggest problems with cheap quartz watches. Most men do not want to think about battery replacements. They buy a watch, wear it, forget it, then one day it stops, the drawer eats it, and the watch disappears from rotation.
The Citizen understood that the best maintenance is the maintenance you never have to do, and that is why EcoDrive is such a strong value proposition.
You get quartz accuracy, low ownership hassle, and long-term reliability in watches that often sit in a very accessible price range.
Now compare that to what happens in the middle of the market, where some brands charge more because they use automatic movements. Automatic movements are charming, they have mechanics, they have a sweep, they feel alive, but charm is not the same as practicality.
An inexpensive automatic can be a beautiful thing, but it can also be less accurate, more fragile, thicker on the wrist, and more expensive to repair.
A lot of buyers fall in love with the word automatic without asking whether that makes the watch better for their actual life.
Citizen gives you another answer. Maybe the best everyday movement is not the one with the most romance, but the one that keeps accurate time and keeps going.
Construction-wise, Citizen is not perfect across every model. Some bracelets are average, some dials are conservative, some cases feel more practical than luxurious.
But the core value is real. You often get stainless steel cases, dependable water resistance on sport models, readable dials, and strong lume on the right lines.
You also get a movement ecosystem backed by a serious manufacturer instead of a random catalog part dressed up with marketing. And that matters.
Because many micro brands and fashion brands are assemblers, buying a case here, a movement there, a strap somewhere else, then building a story around the final product.
Citizen is not just styling a watch. Citizen has watchmaking infrastructure, and that is the difference between a brand that sells an object and one that understands the engine inside it.
The reason Citizen gets ignored is emotional. It does not always feel sexy, and it does not trigger the same collector obsession as a Swiss name or a limited edition.
Citizen feels available, and in watches, availability gets punished. But availability is not a flaw if the product is good.
It means parts are easier to understand, service is less mysterious, prices stay grounded, and you are less likely to pay a scarcity tax for a watch that does not deserve one.
A Citizen EcoDrive is the kind of watch a man can buy, wear daily, travel with, sweat in, dress up slightly, and forget to worry about.
That is not boring, that is freedom. And in a market addicted to romance, Citizen wins by being relentlessly practical. Number 3, Timex, which is complicated, and that is why this block matters. Because not every affordable brand is good in the same way. Some brands are consistent, some are technical, some are rugged. Timex is the brand where you need taste, because you cannot just say Timex is great and buy anything with the name on the dial. Timex has made watches that feel cheap because they are cheap. Loud ticking, basic straps, lightweight cases, finishing that does not hide the price.
But then, inside the same brand, you find watches that make no sense for the money, like the Weekender, the Expedition, and the Q reissues.
You find the Marlin, the Waterbury line, certain field watches, certain vintage-inspired pieces that look better than watches costing 3 or 4 times as much.
That is the Timex secret. It is not a brand you blindly trust. It is a catalog you learn to navigate.
The average consumer ignores Timex because it feels like a drugstore watch, a mall watch, a back-to-school watch, and that reputation is partly earned.
But it also hides the fact that Timex has one of the best instincts for casual design in the affordable market.
A good Timex knows how to look relaxed. And that sounds simple, but it is not.
A lot of cheap watches try too hard, making the case too large, the dial too busy, the logo too loud, the colors too forced.
They copy dive watches, racing chronographs, pilot watches, and dress watches without understanding proportion. But Timex at its best understands restraint. A simple field watch on a canvas strap, a vintage-style diver with the right colors, a small hand-wound-looking dress watch aesthetic, a clean dial that works with denim, boots, an Oxford shirt, or a worn-in jacket, and that versatility is real value.
Because the best affordable watch is not always the one with the highest specification sheet, it is the one you actually wear.
A watch can have sapphire crystal, an automatic movement, a screw-down crown, and a bracelet that sounds impressive in a product listing.
But if it looks awkward on your wrist, does not match your wardrobe, and feels like costume jewelry, then the specs are doing more work than the design.
Timex reminds you that design is a feature, not decoration, and a weekender is not technically impressive.
But put it on the right strap and it becomes one of the easiest casual watches in the world to wear.
An Expedition can look better with rugged clothing than a polished luxury watch ever could, and a Marlin can give you vintage dress watch energy.
Now, the movement story depends on the model. Timex uses a lot of quartz, some mechanical pieces exist, and some reissue lines use movements that fit the price and purpose.
The important thing is not that every movement is special. The important thing is that the price often makes sense.
When Timex charges affordable money for a simple movement, that can be honest. But when a fashion brand charges premium money for the same basic experience, that is branding doing a magic trick. And this is the middle of the video turn, because once you understand Timex, you understand the entire affordable watch market.
Cheap is not one category. There is cheap disposable, there is cheap honest, and there is cheap excellent.
Timex can be all three depending on the model, and that is why the buyer has to stop shopping by brand name alone.
You have to start shopping by line, case size, movement, crystal, strap, and use case, because a weak Timex feels like a cheap watch. A good Timex feels like a smart object, and a smart object does not need to apologize for the price.
This is where the watch world gets uncomfortable, because some people would rather overpay for a safe logo than learn how to separate the good models from the lazy ones. Timex rewards the person who pays attention and punishes the person who buys blindly, and that is not a flaw, that is a filter. Number 4, Addiesdive, and now we enter the part of the market that makes traditional watch buyers nervous.
The Chinese homage watch is where the conversation gets emotional fast, because some people hate them for borrowing design language from famous watches. Some people love them because they deliver specifications that established brands refuse to offer at the same price.
And some people pretend the whole category does not exist because it disrupts the comfortable story that good watches must come from expensive places.
Addiesdive is one of the brands that forces the question: what are you actually paying for? Because when you look at certain affordable Addiesdive models, the spec sheet can be almost absurd for the money.
Stainless steel cases, automatic movements like the Seiko NH35 in many mechanical models, sapphire crystal on some references, and solid bracelets on better models. Dive watch styling, usable loom, screw-down crowns on many sport pieces, and a price that can sit below what many fashion brands charge for a basic quartz watch.
Now, not every Addiesdive is a masterpiece, and at this end of the market, quality control can vary.
Finishing may not match more expensive enthusiast micro brands, bracelets can still have sharp spots, and designs can feel too close to the watches that inspired them.
But the value argument is impossible to ignore, because Addiesdive does not ask you to believe you are buying luxury.
It asks a much more practical question. Do you want a tough-looking mechanical watch with strong specifications for very little money?
That is different, and that difference matters, because a fake luxury watch pretends to be something it is not.
A dishonest brand uses borrowed prestige, inflated retail pricing, and vague heritage language to make an ordinary product feel elite.
A good homage watch, when sold transparently, is not doing that. It is saying the specifications are strong for the price.
It is for someone who wants the look and the function without pretending he bought the original, and that will still bother some people.
Original design has value, brand identity has value, long-term service infrastructure has value, and a company that creates its own visual language deserves credit. But the buyer also deserves honesty, and honesty includes admitting that many expensive watches are not expensive because their materials are 10 times better. They are expensive because distribution, marketing, retail margin, brand positioning, and status all stack on top of the object.
Addiesdive strips much of that away, and the result is not romantic, it is not heritage, and it is not something you pass down with a dramatic story. It is a watch you buy because the parts make sense, and that is why it gets ignored. It lacks prestige, lacks a name people recognize, lives in online listings instead of polished boutiques, and the logo itself does not carry emotional weight.
But on the wrist, the watch does not care about those debates because the crystal resists scratches and the automatic movement can be familiar and serviceable.
The case can feel solid, the bracelet can be replaced, and the price can be low enough that the risk is controlled, and that is real-world value. The danger with brands like Addiesdive is buying only the fantasy of specifications, because specs are not everything. A watch can have sapphire and still feel soulless, it can have an automatic movement and still be badly proportioned, it can copy the silhouette of an icon and still miss the reason the original worked.
So the smart buyer uses Addiesdive carefully, looking for the models with the strongest movement, cleanest proportions, best reviews, and least awkward branding. You avoid the pieces that feel like pure imitation without refinement, and you treat the brand not as a luxury substitute, but as a value experiment. And when the experiment works, it works hard, because the comparison becomes brutal.
A $100 or $150 homage watch with sapphire and an NH35 can offer objective specifications that embarrass a $300 fashion. That does not make the homage watch a luxury watch. It makes the fashion watch look exposed, and that is the real lesson.
Addiesdive is not dangerous because it beats luxury. It is dangerous because it reveals how little some mid-priced watches are actually giving you.
Number 5, Orient, and this is the gold mine because Orient is what happens when affordability, identity, construction, and credibility meet in one place.
It is not just cheap, it is not just practical, it is not just spec-driven, and it is not just riding on someone else's design.
Orient feels like a real watch brand that somehow forgot to become overpriced, and that is why it belongs at the end.
The average buyer may not understand Orient immediately. It does not have the mainstream recognition of Casio or the same solar identity as Citizen. It does not have the nostalgic American familiarity of Timex or the shock value spec sheet of some Chinese homage brands. Orient sits in a quieter space. And that quiet space is where the value lives, because for years, Orient has been one of the best gateways into automatic watches. Models like the Bambino, the Casio, the Mako, and the Ray became favorites because they offer real mechanical watch appeal at prices that still feel grounded.
You get automatic movements from a legitimate Japanese watchmaker, you get designs with identity, and you get watches that can dress up or down. You get pieces that feel like they belong in a collection, not just in a budget recommendation list, and that is the difference.
A Casio is an unbeatable tool, a Citizen is an engineering solution, a Timex is a design lesson, and an Addiesdive is a specification disruptor.
Orient is the affordable brand that makes you feel like you bought a watch with a soul without paying for luxury theater. Take the Bambino. It is not trying to be a Swiss dress watch, it is not pretending to be from a luxury maison, and it is not covered in fake heritage signals. It is simply one of the most wearable, affordable dress watches ever made. Domed crystal, clean dial, elegant proportions on the right. A look that works with tailoring, knitwear, loafers, a wool coat, or a simple button-down. And for a man building a wardrobe, that matters. Because a watch is not just a machine, it is part of the outfit. And it changes the way your clothes read.
A steel dive watch says one thing, a digital Casio says another, a field Timex says another, and a Bambino under a cuff says something completely different.
Orient gives you that language without forcing you into luxury pricing. And then look at the sport models.
The Casio, Mako, and Ray lines have built a reputation because they offer the kind of everyday dive watch formula men actually use. Automatic movement, wearable case shapes, solid water resistance on many models, strong casual versatility, and enough design character that the watch does not feel like a random copy.
Are they perfect? No. Some bracelets can be upgraded, some models are thicker than dress watch people prefer, and some finishing is clearly built to a price. But that is not the point, because the point is that Orient usually makes the money visible. You can feel where the budget went. into the movement, into the case, into the dial, into the practical experience of ownership.
That is what separates value from cheapness, because cheapness is when the price is low because the product has been hollowed out.
Value is when the price is low because the brand made intelligent compromises, and Orient makes intelligent compromises.
It does not give you luxury finishing, but it gives you character. It does not give you a famous Swiss logo, but it gives you mechanical credibility.
It does not give you a boutique experience, but it gives you a watch you can wear for years without feeling like you were fooled.
And the reason Orient is ignored is simple. It lives in the wrong psychological category.
Too affordable for status buyers, too mechanical for people who only want convenience, too familiar for hardcore collectors who constantly chase the next rare thing.
Too subtle for men who want their watch to announce the price from across the room, but for the man who actually wants to wear the watch, Orient is one of the best answers in the market.
Because it does something rare. It lets an affordable watch stop being an alternative and become the choice. Not because you could not afford something else, but because this was the smarter buy, and that is the moment a brand becomes dangerous.
When it no longer needs the excuse of price, when you can say, I bought this because it is good, not I bought this because it was cheap, that is Orient. The hidden lesson across all 5 brands is that affordable watches only look simple when you judge them from a distance.
Up close, the market separates fast because some cheap watches are disposable and some expensive watches are over-decorated mediocrity.
Some logos are doing more work than the movement, and some heritage stories are just price insulation. Some entry luxury pieces are less honest than a $60 quartz watch that tells you exactly what it is, and once you see that, you cannot unsee it.
You start checking the crystal, you start asking about the movement, you start feeling the bracelet, and you start looking at the crown action. You start comparing water resistance, noticing case finishing, and asking whether the design belongs to the brand or was borrowed without thought.
You start calculating cost per wear instead of retail price, and that is when watches become easier to buy.
Not because the market gets simpler, but because your standards get clearer, and a watch does not have to be expensive to be good. But it does have to be honest, and Casio is honest because it gives you durability without ego.
Citizen is honest because it gives you technology that solves a real problem, and Timex is honest when you choose the right model. Addiesdive is honest when it sells specifications transparently instead of pretending to be luxury, and Orient is honest because it gives you identity, mechanical charm, and value. That is the map, and once you have the map, the logo becomes less powerful, and you stop asking, will people recognize this? And you start asking, where did my money go? Into the movement, into the crystal, into the case, into the bracelet, into the finishing, into the maintenance experience, into the design, or into the brand's ability to make you feel insecure without it?
That is the entire watch business in one question, because a $1,000 watch can be worth every dollar if the construction, movement, finishing, design, and ownership experience justify it.
An $80 watch can be a waste if it falls apart, looks awkward, and exists only because it was cheap, because price alone tells you almost nothing. But value leaves evidence, in the way the second's hand hits the markers, in the way the bezel turns, in the way the case edges are finished.
In the way the bracelet does not pull hair, in the way the loom still works when the room goes dark, and in the way the watch still looks right after the trend has moved on. In the way you keep reaching for it without thinking, and that is the final rule.
Do not buy the cheapest watch, do not buy the most expensive watch. Buy the watch where the money is still inside the object.
Because maybe the biggest mistake is not wearing a cheap watch, maybe the biggest mistake is wearing an expensive watch that only becomes impressive when someone else notices the logo.